Hi, it's Jenny from the Sewing Palace in Helena, Montana. I'm here to show you our newest block for our online quilt along from Saturday Sampler. The book is right over here. It's called Double Dozen and it's by Kaye England. We're on block 2 and the block's name is called Lover's Lane, and it's this block right down here. It's made up of a couple different units I'm going to talk to you about. I'm going to show it to you in a traditional colorway on the quilt up above, which is this block here. We've got some half square triangle units, which are these. And then we've got some blocks that are called square and a square. This is the block, and it's got a center square on the inside, so it's called square and a square. And then we also have it in the bright Kaye colorway, which is right down here on my woolen pressing mat, and it's being assembled. And it's got the square and a square blocks and some half square triangle units in the corner. So I'm just going to show you a couple things that you'll want to have. You'll want to have your pattern, which is called Double Dozen, and then a couple of these gadgets are super helpful. A nice sharp rotary cutter is a must. You'll want to have a marking utensil that's used for fabric. This is a friction erasable pen. It erases with an iron. You'll also want to have a seam ripper handy just in case. You want some Aurifil thread. This is a really high quality cotton thread. It's awesome. It doesn't make a lot of lint. And this is some Best Press, which will stabilize your fabric prior to sewing. This is Mint Splash. You don't have to have a flavor or a smell to it. You can get non-scented, but it is wonderful stuff to use on your fabric. You'll need an iron and an ironing board. You'll also need some sort of rulers to cut your fabric, and then this is a specialty ruler called a block lock half square triangle ruler. And this is a 2.5 inch one. You can also use a larger one that's a 4.5 or a 6.5, and I'm going to show you the difference between those two. So those are the gadgets. I'm going to be sewing on a Bernina 480 here in a second, and you'll want a 1/4 inch foot to sew your block together with. So it's a 1/4 inch on either side of the foot. So let's look a little bit at the pattern in the book, and it is block 2. And I've written in my book just a little bit. We did Good Cheer last month, and this month on page 4 we're on block called Lover's Lane. And it's in grayscale here. You can see the dark fabrics where they're located, the mediums where they're located, they're that light gray, and then the white. And then you've got a broken down diagram over to the side that shows you kind of how it's constructed, and then all the cutting information is on the inside. So I haven't done much change in the cutting aside from down at the bottom. There's quite a few that are referred to as half square triangles, or HS tries is what it refers to in the book, and it's a 2 7/8 inch cut, and right over here it says HS tries. So those I'm going to change. I'm going to cut them just a little bit bigger and square them down. And those are the half square triangle units. And I'm going to cut them 3 1/4 inches instead of 2 7/8 as it says in the pattern. That'll just give me a little bit more wiggle room to square up. So that's how I wanted to explain that to you. And then let's look at our block a little bit. So first I'll talk about the connector, or the square and a square blocks. They're made using a connector method, and they have triangles on the side. What you start off with is a large square of solid fabric. So in this one it's a solid piece of light colored fabric, and then you take 4 other squares, and these measurements are in the book. I followed the directions on that, and you lay them so that they're right sides together in the opposing corners, and you sew a diagonal line from point to point and then flip it out. When it flips out, it should line up with that edge. If it doesn't, that just means maybe your line wasn't quite straight or your square wasn't cut square, so try it again. On the other side, you'll do the exact same thing diagonally from point to point and flip it out. You will trim this excess off once you know it all squares up, and then you'll do the other 2 sides. So on this one, I'll lay this, and there should be overlap in the corners. You sew diagonally and flip it out. I'm just going to pin it to give you a visual. And then on this one, right sides together, should have overlap diagonally, flip it out, and there is your square and a square unit. You will make this style of unit 4 different times. So it's the same as this, it's the same as this, this, and this. So if you see this, if I just rotate it, it's the same exact unit. You just have to make that 4 times. So if you look at that closely, it's light in the center, dark on the side, and medium over here. This square right dead center is also a square and a square unit. It's just made with different color choices. So it starts off with a big square in the center that is dark, and then mediums or lights actually in the corner. These are lights. And they're sewn opposite sides, corner to corner, flip them out, opposite sides, corner to corner, and flip them out. So you will end up making 5 square and a square units. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The other units are these ones in the corner, and they're made up of half square triangles. So this is a half square triangle unit. This is a light, this is a medium, this is a light, this is a dark, light, medium, and light. So when you sew those together, they start to form kind of a little star in the center. If you can see that star forming out from there. And then I'll show you how to make those blocks just a little bit easier. So in the book, I'll just point to it one more time. It's Lover's Lane, and it's going to be these down at the bottom where it says 2 7/8, and I'm cutting 3 1/4 instead of 2 7/8. Okay, so when I cut those, you'll end up having 2. So when you cut them, if I want to make 2 of these, this medium, I will cut a 3 1/4 of a medium and a 3 1/4 of a light. I'll lay them right sides together, and then I'm going to mark from point to point once they're laying right sides together, and I'm going to sew on each side. So I'm just going to take it to the sewing machine so you just can kind of see that process. So my 1/4 of an inch foot is along the edge of the line that I've marked, and I marked that with my friction pen. And I'm just going to sew along. And then when I come off the edge of the fabric, I usually will go onto a little scrap of fabric. I call it stoppy starties. So I've stopped on that piece. I cut off my block and my other stoppy starty, and then I just turn it around and I sew down the new side right down this way. I feed it into my machine. I'm using that 1/4 of an inch foot. And I'm actually using the left side. The beauty about that foot is it's a 1/4 of an inch on each side. It's called a Bernina 37D foot. I absolutely love it. Then I come off, I sew on a couple stitches of air, and I get my next piece of fabric. So what I've done there is I've sewn on each side of that, and I'm going to cut it right down the center. Once you do that, you'll end up with 2 pieces, like so. So then you cut them apart, and then you press them towards the dark. So I would take it to my ironing board and press that towards the dark. Once you've done that, you should have something that looks close to that. And the challenge with half square triangles is making sure that this is actually the finished measurement. So that's why I'm telling you to cut it bigger and trim it down. So we're going to trim it down using a ruler called a block lock ruler. It has a routered out corner or a edge, and that edge lines up with your seam and it will lock into place. So when it's locked in, it doesn't teeter, it doesn't move. If you use a regular ruler, it would be flat like it is on this opposite side, and when that lays on, you'll see it teetering back and forth and it can slip. So that teetering makes it a little hard to square up. That's the wonderful thing about a block lock, is it'll just lock in. There's no teetering, it's very solid. And what you're going to do is you're going to square it up all the way around to measure 2 1/2. This ruler is an exact 2 1/2 inch ruler, so all I do is take my rotary cutter and trim all those edges down. If you had one that was just a little bit larger, you'd trim one side. So you just trim a little bit off one side right here, and then I'm going to reach around right over you like so, and I just trim that so it's nice and square. And then I would slide this ruler to the correct measurement, which is 2 1/2, and then I would cut the other side. So I'm going to do that with my straight square ruler just so you can see that process. I'm going to line it up and trim it down. So at this point I'm going to be trimming around all the sides. It's nice to have a rotating mat if you have that handy, or you just move your fabric around or walk around your board. Then when you're done, you have an exact 2.5 inch half square triangle unit. Then you'll put it into your block, which is over here, and this dark would end up living in one of these corners right there, and of course the mediums are there. When you sew those together, you'll sew a dark to a medium and then a medium to a light, and then you'll lay them together. And if you take these and you press one seam that way and one seam that way, when you go to put them together, they'll just lock in together and you'll have that bulk of the seam just kind of spread out and not real heavy on one side. And then you'll sew down that seam, and once you've done that, you can press that seam open or you can press it to one side or the other. So that's the basics of those blocks, and that is the Lover's Lane block from the Double Dozen book from Kaye England. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.